This story contains mature subject matter, including discussions of suicide and medically assisted death. Viewer discretion is advised.
On this edition of The Fifth Estate, the mess that is MAID.
Do you know what this has done to our family? With no justice, no accountability?
It's offered as an act of compassion, but today, medical assistance in dying is under attack.
And I thought, how on earth did my son get accepted?
Accessed by people whose reasons for wanting to die aren't only medical.
You know, I can't create housing for myself. What else was I going to do?
Offered to people who aren't seeking to die at all.
That caseworker not only offered MAID, it was unprompted, and it was pushed after 2 no's.
There hasn't been a slippery slope. I think we've fallen off a cliff. How many wrongful deaths are too many?
Mr. Reddy, hello, Julian Finlay. Very nice to please you.
As we sit down with the minister responsible. How is it moral for a country to offer assisted death to people that's doing so little to help assist live? I'm Julian Finlay. MAID, or medical assistance in dying, has been law in this country for nearly 7 years. The number of Canadians dying by MAID is growing, in part because access is expanding. Today, you don't have to be at death's door to get MAID. You don't even have to be dying. And that has reignited debate in this country, on track to become one of the most permissive euthanasia jurisdictions in the world. This is the Fifth Estate.
Wait, I'm gonna come.
It's hard to imagine it now, but last fall, at the age of 23, Kiano Vafaeian had a date to die.
Tomorrow, I was planning to wake up quite early, before the sun rose, spend time with my dogs to be the last day with them, the last morning. So my appointment was 9 a.m.
We first met Kiano on the eve of that date. A lifelong diabetic, he'd recently lost sight in one eye. Depressed and in pain from surgery that failed to save his sight, he told us he'd found a doctor who'd agreed to end his life. Then his family found an email.
The letter, you know, I'll never forget what I read. I couldn't believe my mouth open, dropped to the ground. It's like an itinerary.
It was an itinerary, clinical, stark, and that's what Kiano's Uncle Mike found so troubling.
Kiano was to show up at 8:30. Show up at 8:30, come a half an hour early. By 8:45, these are the notes that I was, by 8:45, we'll call in the nurse. 9 o'clock, he gets his needle. 5 minutes after that, remove the dogs. Nice doing business with you. And we jumped into a state of panic, scrambling. My sister just looking at her, my insides just broke.
I was shocked. I couldn't believe it. I was obviously upset. I was just furious about the situation. I thought, how on earth did my son get accepted? That's crazy.
But it didn't make it less real. With her son's date for MAID just weeks away, Margaret Marcilla launched into action.
And that's when I started reaching out to everyone that I know. Listen, guys, this is what's happening. My son got approved for euthanasia, and I need everyone's help. I need you guys to post this everywhere. I need you guys to let people know. And that's what everyone did.
Her reach out quickly became a social media campaign. She named the doctor, and within days, more than 10,000 people had signed a petition calling on Ontario's health minister to intervene. It never came to that. Having approved and set a date for Kiano's death twice, the doctor decided to cancel, leaving the family relieved, but like many who heard the story, stunned that a 23-year-old with complications of diabetes had come that close to being helped to die.
Everyone was replying back, shocked, because no one knew that it could have been for someone who has diabetes and just now recently lost his eyesight. Everyone thought it was for old people, euthanasia is for old people who are already dying. But now things have changed.
It's the case of Sue Rodriguez.
In fact, it used to be illegal for medical practitioners to help end someone's life. 30 years ago, Sue Rodriguez challenged that law and lost.
If I cannot give consent to my own death, whose body is this?
By 2015, though, the court's thinking had changed.
A personal triumph for the family of Kay Carter. She fought to have a doctor help her die in BC.
The Supreme Court's Carter decision said the ban on medically assisted dying contravened the Charter of Rights, paving the way for Canada to pass a new law making MAID legal. But that law came with limits. MAID would only be available to those whose natural deaths were, quote, reasonably foreseeable. Remarkably, more than 30,000 Canadians have since ended their lives using that criteria. But jump ahead to 2021. In response to another court challenge, Canada's law on medically assisted dying changed again.
We've worked pretty diligently to get to this point. We've consulted, we've put together what we think is a thoughtful piece of legislation.
The new law expanded eligibility for MAID. Today, death no longer has to be imminent. Any Canadian over 18 can be considered for MAID as long as their condition is, quote, grievous and irremediable, meaning they're in an advanced state of irreversible decline, and their suffering can't be relieved under conditions they consider acceptable.
Just let's do this one thing at a time. This is the...
To Kiano, tired of years of navigating his body's insulin and using medical marijuana to control his post-surgery pain, the expanded legislation looked like a way out.
People are going to look at you and they're going to see this good-looking, healthy 23-year-old man. Yes, you have diabetes. Many people have diabetes. Yes, you have vision loss. That's sad.
Many people have vision loss.
But people survive with vision loss. What do you say to those people who say you are not the kind of person that we expect to be accessing MAID and dying through medically assisted death?
Well, the next relatable thing would be suicide, which I've tried all my life. I attempted suicide, and it was so painful.
Is that the choice you see, that if you...
It's the more dignified way is medically assisted death, right?
So how did you go about making a request? How did you find out about the process?
I called the 1-800 number.
Kiano knew the number for the MAID information line because he'd called it before. At 19, he discussed MAID with Toronto doctor Joshua Tepper, but that was before the legislation changed. His death wasn't foreseeable and he didn't qualify. Last spring, when he called Tepper back, the reception was different because the law was. Diabetes may be treatable, but it is incurable, irremediable, as the law says. And if Kiano said his pain was insufferable, well, under the law, it wasn't up to his doctor to decide he was wrong.
And when you said to him, I want to die, that's how I want to end my pain and suffering, what did he do? Did he try to talk you out of it?
I don't remember exactly how his first response was to it, but I know that our conversations, he always heard me out.
Kiano was being careful with us. He wanted to protect Dr. Tepper, he said. Canada's MAID legislation builds in safeguards. Applicants have to be assessed by 2 independent practitioners. There's also a mandatory waiting period, a minimum of 3 months. That raised questions for Kiano's family. A document his mother shared shows Kiano officially requested MAID on August 11th, 2022. 6 weeks before Dr. Tepper set a date. When we reached out to the doctor, he cited patient confidentiality, but he insisted the 90-day requirement was met, claiming he started further assessing Kiano when he reconnected with him in May. As for the timing of Kiano's request, Ontario doesn't stipulate when in the assessment process it be filed. Then there's the issue of the second assessment. Tepper referred Kiano to one of his colleagues, who Kiano says conducted her assessment without ever meeting him in person.
Did you get that assessment?
Yes, I had it at the keg. I ate at the keg and I had it on FaceTime. I was eating dinner. It wasn't very casual because I had to sit and really digest what the questions were, because in the beginning it was very basic.
Hang on, you were talking to the person, the doctor who was going to assess you on FaceTime at the keg?
Yes.
So, but based on that conversation, she signed off as an assessor?
No, that was her first impression.
That was first. Did you meet with her then again?
No, just we spoke on the phone afterwards.
Right. While all of this was happening, Kiano's mother says she knew nothing. She could tell her son was struggling, but was confident he'd improve with time.
That's why I'm very concerned about this whole thing, because it's not like my son lived with blindness for years or tried to even come close to living with blindness. Like we're just setting things up for him. You know, I'd gotten him a scooter, which he enjoys a lot, vision goggles for blind people. So we got that, which he sees a lot better if he wants to watch TV.
So how, she wondered, could any doctor agree to help her son die? She decided to reach out to Dr. Tepper herself.
I texted him and I said that I was referred by a friend.
Posing as a potential MAID applicant with a profile similar to Kiano's and recording part of her call, which she has since shared with us.
And I said the same thing as my son. I have diabetes since birth, and I've lost my eyesight for quite some time. And he goes, oh, I've got a lot of patients like that. Okay, no problem. At no point during the conversation did he ever ask me, are you sure you want to do this? You know, once you do it, you can't take it back. He did not ask me any of those questions. It was just, it felt like a business call for someone to kill me.
To be fair, it was an introductory call, not a formal assessment. But she says she will always be haunted by what might have happened if they hadn't found that email. Would she have only learned of her son's decision to get MAID after he was dead? But Kiano's wasn't the only troubling story we would hear. When we come back, MAID as a social safety net?
As much as I did not want to die, the prospect of not having a place to live, no roof over my head, you know, that frightened me a lot more.
Medically assisted dying, doctors sworn to protect life, instead helping people die, has always been controversial. But in the nearly 7 years since MAID became law in Canada, polls show a vast majority support it to help those suffering escape a painful death. But what if it's a painful life you're trying to escape? Amir Farsoud of St. Catharines, Ontario, has been physically disabled for more than a decade. Government support barely covers his expenses in an apartment that is already a bargain. That was put into jeopardy last summer when his landlord decided to sell.
As I kept looking at places to try and find another place to move to, there just aren't any.
The waiting list for assisted housing was 8 years long, and everything else was just too expensive.
It was toward the end of the month, and I was trying to get something to eat. Opened the fridge, there was nothing in it. Opened the pantry, there was nothing in it. There was still like 4 days to go in the month. I remember just sort of breaking down and crying like a 5-year-old.
That's when he decided to turn to MAID.
Originally, when I had thought of MAID, it was something that I was going to access, you know, whatever, 10, 15 years down the road, when my various ailments got past the point that they could be managed well enough to continue. But it got to the point where it was just, well, I'm basically faced with a choice of, do I want to die frozen on a subway grate in Toronto in a couple of months, or at least in my bed with a modicum of sort of comfort and dignity, if you will. And that was pretty much a no-brainer.
I mean, you say it so matter-of-factly, but it is such a stark choice.
I had my nights of turning into a puddle of goo and you know, being frightened out of my wits and all of that. But as much as I did not want to die, the prospect of not having a place to live, no roof over my head, winter coming up and all of that, that frightened me a lot more, because unlike death, that I've actually experienced in the past. So I knew exactly what my other alternative was going to feel like.
Last August, Amir filled out his application for MAID. He didn't want to die, but he was convinced he could no longer afford to live. From the beginning, it's a scenario that has haunted disability advocates like Catherine Frazee.
We let the genie out of the bottle, and now we're seeing the very real and very catastrophic consequences that people with disabilities had warned about.
As a former head of the Ontario Human Rights Commission, she opposed the government's 2021 decision to extend MAID to people who aren't actually dying.
I don't think that people appreciate how consequential this change in Canadian health policy is going to be in their own families.
If you had to distill it for people, what would you say?
It's now possible for you or someone you love to receive death as a form of healthcare treatment upon request. And those reasons, it appears, they don't have to be medical. The law says they do, but it's not how it's playing out.
Indeed, you only have to look at recent headlines. People with chronic but treatable conditions applying for and being approved for MAID, saying their real motivations were poverty and inadequate housing. 2 years ago, advocates compiled a list of cases of concern, which now reaches into the dozens, and helped prompt the United Nations to weigh in. 3 UN disability and human rights experts warned Canada that its new law appears to violate the right to life of people with disabilities, and that under the guise of providing choice, vulnerable people could be induced to die.
As you read about these cases and understand why people made the decisions they did, I'm just curious how it makes you feel.
Well, it deeply troubles me. It troubles me for so many reasons. How should we respond to someone whose anguish is very clearly articulated as, I need help. I need a few extra hours of home care a day, otherwise my life is unbearable. Well, when I hear that kind of story, my compassionate response is to say, let's help you. I don't know what it says about us that our response instead is to say, well, that's tough, that's tragic. How about we offer you the choice to end your life?
Ms. Lametti, hello, Gillian Findlay. Very nice to please see you.
As Justice Minister, David Lametti has overseen Canada's MAID expansion and believes the safeguards his government built into the legislation do protect the vulnerable.
I'm satisfied that we have a good set of balances in place, and I generally trust our medical profession.
You've actually said about your safeguards recently, you've called them excellent, but I'm just wondering how you can conclude that they're excellent if in fact we now have documented cases of people who serious questions have been raised about how they got accepted for MAID.
Well, serious questions are being raised about those cases. The medical practitioners, the MAID practitioners who are feeding input in the system are telling us that it seems to be going quite well.
But when you hear people who say, I don't want to die, but I can't afford to live, what do you say to those people?
I say we need to work with provinces, and provinces need to certainly step up and look at those supports. The federal government needs to support provinces that are stepping up. And we as elected officials need to make sure that we build a social safety network that that allows people to live with dignity.
But we don't have a social safety network that allows everybody who needs help to have it. So why are we allowing MAID as an alternative, which is what it appears to be?
Well, I would challenge you on the sense that it's an alternative.
For some people, they're choosing it as an
alternative. This is a regime that the courts have held, the Supreme Court of Canada has held, is a right that all Canadians have. So in my case, as a federal minister, in this case the Minister of Justice, it's my responsibility to ensure that Canadians' charter rights are protected. There are often other stories, backstories about cases. Sometimes they're a cry for help, and it's up to medical professionals to make sure that they don't fall into that, and to help people find the help that they need.
Which does put a lot of responsibility on medical professionals.
When I broached it, he actually kind of looked shocked.
Amir Farsoud wasn't sure his doctor would approve his request for MAID, but he didn't hold back in telling him his real reasons for wanting to die. You didn't hide that from him. You were upfront.
Yeah, completely. The fact that if I were to become homeless, I would become dead first was a decision I had made, and there was nothing he could do to alter that. And I'm glad that he saw it the same way as I did, that forcing me to die painfully in an uncontrolled environment with lots of pain and terror would be a lot more harmful than allowing me to do so in relative comfort in my own bed or in a hospital someplace.
In the end, the doctor signed off on Amir's request. He wouldn't be interviewed either. But once again, it raises questions. Who are this country's gatekeepers to MAID? And how do they decide who gets through? When we come back.
She wasn't imminently dying. And then I hear that, my mom was approved for MAID because she was frail. Well, aren't all elderly people frail? So that's a reason to kill people now.
We are all aware that if we do it wrong, we could go to jail for 14 years. This is work that we take very, very seriously.
This was my mom. Like, this is her at all times. She was a big kid and just like full of life and so goofy and fun.
That's Donna's Christmas present. I wanted to get her something she'd use every day.
It's been over a year since Donna Duncan of Abbotsford, BC, died from MAID at the age of 61. Her daughters, ALICIA and CHRISTIE, are not at peace.
My mom was such a loving, caring individual, and I just felt she gave up. And it was way easier for her to die than it was for her to live.
I just want some sort of accountability, that someone needs to be held accountable for this and just bring more awareness. And yeah, I think that's the goal at the end of the day.
On this day, they're heading to a meeting with Abbotsford police, who've been investigating Donna's death, how and why she was approved for MAID.
I'm emotionally prepared for the worst, but I do think that the evidence speaks for itself.
Well, we got this. We'll have answers soon.
Yeah, exactly.
To them, the evidence is clear. A year and a half before she ended her life, Donna was in a car crash, diagnosed with post-concussive syndrome. The deterioration that followed, they believe, was less physical than psychological, the combined effects of COVID isolation and depression.
We had been talking about her depression, and, she was a psychiatric nurse, and I said to her, that it must be really humbling to be on the other side of, a mental illness.
We spoke to, I had spoken to her doctor and said that I was very concerned about my mom's mental well-being.
Medical records confirm her doctor was worried too. I advised her I could not complete her application for MAID, he wrote. I didn't feel she qualifies and believe her mental health really needs to be treated. But Donna refused most treatment. She wasn't eating and losing drastic amounts of weight. The weaker she got, the more determined she seemed to die. Her daughters went to court to try to have her hospitalized, but in the end, Donna got her wish. 2 MAID assessors determined that at just 76 pounds, her death was reasonably foreseeable. The following week, she was injected with the drugs that killed her.
I don't really remember a whole lot after that. I collapsed. And my daughter told me that she heard me scream. I don't remember. I've never felt such intense emotional pain.
This should be a big deal. Every single person in Canada should know about this, and they don't. I didn't know enough about it before this happened to my mom, and now it's too late.
So who makes these decisions and what guides them? In Canada, any licensed doctor or nurse practitioner can become a MAID provider. But there are no national standards of practice nor system of accountability. Ottawa left those to provinces and territories, as well as professional colleges, and requirements do vary. As for training, only Alberta, Manitoba, and Nunavut require it, and once again, what they require varies.
We're in the room to do some MAID training this morning for assessing and providing medical assistance in dying in Canada.
To the extent some MAID providers get any training, it's through the work of Dr. Stephanie Green and the professional association she helped found, CAMAP. Over time, they've developed guidelines for practitioners, but they've had to do it on their own.
When we stepped into this work, we had no experience in it. We had no model. It's a bit of a blind step in 2016, coming to new care without standards, without guidance, without training.
7 years later, CAMAP has government funding to build an accredited curriculum, but it won't be launched until later this year, and it won't be mandatory. So if that raises questions about the quality of assessments in this country, Green insists Canadians shouldn't worry.
I think there's been a lot of negative stories, so maybe people are going to say, huh? And maybe want to be reassured. I don't know. I think the potential for that is real, sadly. I think I think we've done a really good job the first 6 years to earn the respect of the public and the confidence of the public. I hope that it wouldn't be questioned because of a number of news stories.
But the stories aren't built on nothing, and the medical community is divided.
What I see and am concerned about are the cases that are reported and unfortunately sometimes almost treated dismissively as, oh, that's a one-off case, or that's just a case report. These are all people's lives.
Dr. Sonu Gand heads the MAID team at one of Toronto's largest hospitals and knows how challenging assessments can be, especially since that 2021 decision to expand eligibility.
The question we need to ask as we're expanding laws is which mistakes do we want to make? How many wrongful deaths are too many? In my opinion, any are too many.
Do you think there have been wrongful deaths already?
I think that there have been deaths by assisted dying for reasons that society would not support. That's how I would term it.
But how many such deaths? Why are people accessing the expanded MAID program? We don't have a full picture in this country because until now, the government hasn't been asking those questions.
It's up to the medical assessors to say, these are not legitimate reasons to seek MAID.
You've said, I'm just quoting you here, that the vast majority of people seeking MAID are doing it for the right reasons. You believe that. How do you know? Because you don't have data. You're not even going to start collecting data by the government's own admission until this year, 2023, and it's not going to be published till 2024. How do you know?
Well, given I think, the relatively few complaints about the system that have come forward, given the numbers, I think the system's working well. Again,
is that how you establish? Just if nobody complains, it must be okay.
Well, we're building a better statistical base. There's no question about that. We have, I think, in Canada, a great deal of faith in our medical practitioners, and we have a great deal of faith in our police as investigators. It is up to Canadians. If they feel the system is being abused and they witness the system being abused, it's up to them to seek out provincial College of Physicians and Surgeons or to seek the police and say something has gone amiss here.
In going to police about their mother's death, the Duncan sisters hope to make history. No Canadian MAID provider has ever been charged with causing a wrongful death. But after meeting with investigators, they returned home disappointed.
I'm definitely feeling defeated at the moment.
Me too.
Hi, girls.
Hi. Wasn't good news.
Oh, no.
No.
So, they don't have enough evidence to proceed with coroner. Come on.
Police told the sisters the health authority wouldn't release all of their mother's records. Nevertheless, they closed their investigation, concluding the MAID providers who ended Donna's life broke no laws. When we come back, a slippery slope about to get slipperier.
The fact that you have a mental illness doesn't mean you haven't got decision-making capacity. In fact, that's the stigma.
I actually think it's irresponsible. I don't think there's any safe way to do it, and it's actually, frankly, it's embarrassing.
Specifically and solely affects disabled people and no one else.
From ALICIA and CHRISTIE.
Last fall, Ottawa was buzzing with debate about MAID.
My name is CHRISTIE Duncan, and I am here today with my sister ALICIA to share our family's experience regarding medical assistance in dying.
A year after their mother died a medically assisted death, the Duncan sisters appeared before a special parliamentary committee.
Our concern is the current legislation is written in a way that many Canadians are accessing MAID out of desperation and not dignity as it was originally intended.
Access wasn't the only complaint. Another committee heard stories from military veterans and their advocates, saying that among the options a government caseworker offered injured vets was MAID.
He was asking for a completely separate service and supports for neurological injuries. And she said, oh, just by the way, if up the road you have suicidal thoughts, and this is what he told me she said, it's better than blowing your brains out against the wall. How is this legal? He asked the VAC manager. How is this legal? This can't be legal. You can't push this on people.
This is incredibly alarming, you know, to hear this account that, you know, it was pushed upon him, and to the point where it caused him to, you know, be in a far worse place than he was prior to the phone call.
But even more alarming to some is the government's intention to expand MAID yet again. Soon, medical assistance in dying won't be reserved for those suffering debilitating physical conditions. It'll also be available to people whose sole underlying condition is a mental disorder. Those cases were excluded from the government's 2021 expansion, which Senator and psychiatrist Stan Kuchar thought unfair. So you felt this was discriminatory against people with mental illness?
Well, first I felt it was stigmatizing. It was stereotyping people who have mental illnesses as having no decision-making capacity. Those horrible, stigmatizing constructs that society has fought for decades to try to get rid of was appearing back in this legislation.
It's all other criteria.
Kuchar pushed, and the government got on board, striking the special committee as well as a panel of mental health experts. Stronger safeguards would be considered, the government said, but all things being equal, MAID would be expanded to include mental disorders starting this spring. Cue the debate.
We don't assume that just because you have a schizophrenia or depression or a personality disorder, you're not competent.
I likely wouldn't be here today had the option of MAID been available to me in my darkest days.
Dr. Kuchar, I'm going to single you out. You've said all psychiatrists in Canada who object to MAID for mental illness are selfish and paternalistic. I'm not sure what purpose that comment served. I have patients who get better after 5 years, after 10 years, and after 15 years.
I'm appalled by it. I don't think that most people would actually support it if they fully understood what was going on.
In addition to chairing his hospital's MAID team, Dr. Sonogand is past president of the Canadian Psychiatric Association. Along with the psychiatric chairs of every medical school in the country, he called on the government to reconsider.
Our law is supposed to be about providing MAID when a medical condition is irremediable, meaning we can predict it won't get better. All of the evidence shows that our ability to predict when a mental illness will or will not improve doesn't exist. It's no better than chance. So it's literally like flipping a coin.
If this goes ahead, what are your concerns? What's going to happen in this country?
I think we will end up having people in transient periods of despair, that they will opt for MAID, and yet for some of those people we 100% know, 100% know, some of them would have gotten better. We just won't know which ones.
So my response to that is, if you're waiting for a miracle to happen and then decide to look back retrospectively, then that statement would make sense if you could be certain that the miracle is going to happen. But if the miracle doesn't happen, then what? You had that person suffering year after year after year after year. The question that I would say, how long should someone who is suffering intolerably suffer waiting for something that may or may not happen in the future?
Over the years, Minister Lametti has come to agree those with mental disorders deserve the same rights and choices as everyone else.
Let's not forget that mental illness is illness, that people suffering from a mental disorder are suffering. And this, in the view of a person who's capable of making that decision, is something that they may want to consider should they fit the criteria.
But Minister, anybody in this country who has tried to access mental health care will tell you how difficult it has become. How can you ethically, in good conscience, go ahead and provide this to people when you know that they may not have had the ability to get proper treatment?
Well, again, it is something that our courts, and the highest court in Canada, has said is a charter right that Canadians have.
How is this not the state just enabling a suicide?
Well, it is a species of suicide, and suicide in and of itself is not against the law.
No, but we as a country invest lots of money and lots of time to try to prevent people from committing suicide.
And I agree with
How is this consistent then?
I agree with every one of those initiatives. The right for medical assistance in dying is only when there's a grievous and irremediable condition, only when there is a high degree of suffering that can't be cured. It's only in those cases that the state moves in. But there's no inconsistency here. As a state, we have a duty, as a government, we have a duty to make sure that those healthcare supports are in place for people who have suicidal ideations, and we need to help them. We need to help people.
We know we need to get this right in order to protect those who are vulnerable.
All fall, in face of growing opposition, the government insisted its March deadline for expansion was firm. But last month, just days before he sat down with us, an announcement.
Today, we are letting Canadians know that our government intends to work with our parliamentary colleagues in the House and Senate to negotiate an extension of the March 17th, 2023 eligibility date.
Is this a delay or is this a rethink? Is it possible that you may decide that this is just not a place that we are yet ready to go in this country?
No, this is a delay. But I have heard enough voices to say we need a bit more time. So we'll determine what that time period is over coming weeks, but it is just a delay.
Nobody can say that we're going into this with eyes wide closed now. Cautions have been raised. Many cautions have been raised. And whoever is making the final decisions in that, I think that they bear responsibility.
Dr. Gand has already made his final decision. When the government does expand MAID again, he says, he'll no longer be involved.
How do you feel about that?
Actually sad, because I wouldn't have engaged in this whole area unless I did believe that there is a role for it. But it saddens me when I think that as a society, we're willing to just believe it's about our individual autonomy and be willing to then sacrifice other people getting it for all sorts of reasons that I just, you know, I have a hard time reconciling.
How are you?
For Kiano Vafaeian, reconciliation is with his family. When his mother thwarted his attempt to get MAID, he was angry. Today, he's not sure what he thinks.
Do you understand your mom's position?
Of course. I love my mom.
And she loves you. She doesn't want you to die.
Of course she loves me. And I know that too. But it's not enough.
What is your thinking today?
I still don't know.
You don't know.
No. I still don't know.
Why did you decide to do this interview? Why was it important to you?
I feel like to do this interview was a part of my will to live. I feel like it's a part of me trying to change my mind, me trying to have hope and follow a purpose in life rather than choose death.
Weighing life and death is something Amir Farsoud no longer has to worry about, at least for now. When local media got wind of the desperation that led him to seek MAID, donations started pouring in, $60,000 in all.
Wrapping my mind around this second chance has almost been more difficult than wrapping my mind around dying.
What's more, his landlord decided not to sell after all. The only move Amir is having to make today is to a new apartment upstairs.
That's not how this should work, right? I mean, as you say, you won the lottery.
Yes.
Generous people made a generous gesture, and now, because of charity, you're
Yes.
able to have a very different outlook on life.
I got a reprieve. I literally got a second lease on life because of this.
But not everyone will be so lucky. Until conditions improve for people with disabilities in this country, he says his views on MAID will not change.
There's 500,000 people on ODSP in this province. They're not all going to win the lottery. So to deny them, if it gets this bad for them, to say, no, you need to suffer because our conscience demands it. You need to suffer because I need to sleep well at night. And if we're not going to look after them, then for God's sake, let them have that final little bit of dignity that we as a society went out of our way not to give them while they were alive.